The first attack came without warning. For years, humanity had feared the possibility of an alien invasion, but when the Zirac Dominion arrived, it wasn't the fiery, apocalyptic war depicted in movies. There were no warning shots, no dramatic speeches, and no chance for negotiation. One moment, the world was at peace. The next, entire cities were reduced to rubble. The Zirac were a race of towering, reptilian warlords, bred for battle and conquest. Their empire had expanded across the stars, crushing lesser civilizations under the weight of their military supremacy. Humanity, to them, was just another primitive species waiting to be conquered. And so, Earth burned. Their ships, sleek and black like obsidian knives, descended from orbit and unleashed waves of destruction upon human defenses. Energy-based artillery vaporized tanks and bunkers in an instant. Orbital bombardments shattered entire continents. The world's greatest militaries scrambled to respond, but conventional weapons were useless. Bullets flattened against their personal energy shields. Missiles were intercepted mid-flight by autonomous drones. Even nuclear warheads, humanity's last resort, were rendered inert by gravity field distortions. The Zirac generals, perched high in their floating warships, watched the slaughter with amusement. The lesser species of the galaxy always thought they could resist, until they realized how laughably outdated their technology was. The fall of Earth. Within weeks, entire governments collapsed. The Zirac did not negotiate, did not take prisoners, at least, not in the traditional sense. Those captured were either enslaved or subjected to horrific experiments. Human leaders who attempted to surrender were met with swift executions. Across the globe, the resistance crumbled. Nations that had once been superpowers found themselves reduced to little more than scattered bands of survivors. The military might of Earth, so proud and seemingly invincible in the past, had proven to be nothing but an illusion in the face of true intergalactic warfare. The Zirac generals laughed at human weapons. Their elite soldiers, standing over 8 feet tall and clad in shimmering armor, mocked the antique firearms humanity clung to. To them, kinetic projectiles, bullets, shells, even high-caliber rounds, were relics of a bygone era, no more effective than throwing rocks at a warship. And for the most part, they were right. Assault rifles barely scratched their armor. Shotguns couldn't penetrate their reinforced scales. Even the most advanced sniper rifles on Earth failed to breach their shields. It was a massacre. But one thing the Zirac failed to understand, one thing they never even considered, was that war isn't just about technology. It's about strategy. It's about adaptability. And above all, it's about the right person, in the right place, with the right weapon. The last bastion of resistance. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where the terrain was harsh and unyielding, a handful of survivors continued to fight. The Zirac didn't bother to chase them. To the alien overlords, these scattered human fighters were nothing more than an annoyance, mosquitoes buzzing around a behemoth. But they had no idea that one of those mosquitoes had teeth. Among the resistance was a man known only as Reese. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a high-ranking officer. He wasn't even part of an elite military unit. He was a sniper. A damn good one. Before the invasion, Reese had served in the United States Marine Corps as a scout sniper. He had seen combat in the Middle East, in jungles, in deserts, places where the rules of war were blurred, and survival depended on patience, precision, and discipline. But nothing in his past compared to what he was up against now. His old rifles had been useless against Zirac energy shields. His .50 caliber rounds, once capable of piercing through armored vehicles, barely made a dent in the aliens' personal barriers. He had watched friends and fellow soldiers die trying to fight the invaders head-on. So, he stopped fighting them head-on. Instead, he adapted. Reese scoured the battlefield, salvaging anything he could. He experimented with different weapons, tested weak points, and studied the enemy relentlessly. And then, after weeks of trial and error, he made a discovery that would change everything. The first kill. It started with a single shot. A Zirac officer stood atop a ruined skyscraper in what was once Washington, D.C., surveying the city with amusement. His shimmering energy shield flickered in the sunlight, proof of his invulnerability. To him, the idea of a human soldier posing a threat was laughable. But Reese wasn't aiming at him. He was aiming at the tiny, barely visible power node located on the officer's belt, the generator that maintained the energy shield. From over a mile away, hidden within the ruins, Reese exhaled slowly, steadied his aim, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet flew straight and true. A split second later, the officer's shield flickered, then died. The Zirac barely had time to register what had happened before a second shot took him clean through the skull. For the first time since the invasion began, a Zirac general was dead by human hands. And it was only the beginning. The birth of a ghost. The Zirac tried to dismiss it as a fluke. But then another officer fell. And another. Within weeks, their high-ranking commanders were being systematically eliminated, picked off one by one with surgical precision. They never saw their killer. They never heard the shots. All they knew was that somewhere, out there in the ruins, a phantom was hunting them. The Zirac, for all their technological superiority, had never faced an enemy like this before. They had never fought someone who could outthink them, outweight them, and strike with absolute precision from the shadows. The alien generals had scoffed at human weapons. Now, they were terrified of a single rifle in the hands of a ghost. And the legend of Reese the Phantom had only just begun. The Zirac Dominion was no stranger to war. They had razed planets, shattered empires, and enslaved countless species. But never, not once, had they been hunted. Yet, in the Appalachian wilderness, that was exactly what was happening. At first, the reports were dismissed as battlefield confusion. Zirac officers assumed their troops had been ambushed by hidden pockets of human resistance, insurgents using guerrilla tactics to strike and retreat. It was nothing new. The Dominion had crushed such movements before. But then the pattern emerged. Convoys weren't just being ambushed. They were being eliminated, completely. Recon patrols vanished without a trace. Elite officers were taken out with precision shots from miles away. Supply routes became graveyards, littered with the bodies of Zirac warriors who never even saw their attacker. And strangest of all, there were no signs of an army. No bases. No large-scale resistance movements. Just one ghostly presence in the hills, capable of striking with terrifying accuracy. The Phantom had arrived. The first investigation. The Zirac command sent a specialist team to investigate. These were not ordinary soldiers, these were trackers, elite hunters trained to pursue and eliminate rogue elements within conquered worlds. Their armor was fitted with thermal imaging, bioscanners, and active camouflage. They could see in the dark, hear heartbeats from 100 yards away, and track prey across miles of terrain. They were the best the Dominion had to offer. And Reese slaughtered them. The ambush. The trackers moved cautiously through the dense forests, their armor shifting colors to blend with the environment. Their scanners swept for signs of human presence, heat signatures, movement, anything that could give away the location of their prey. They found nothing. Then, without warning, the first tracker went down. A single shot, perfectly placed. Not through the head. Not the chest. Straight through the scanner array on the soldier's helmet. It wasn't a kill shot, but that wasn't the point. Reese had learned early on that the Zirac relied too much on their technology. Their superior vision, tracking capabilities, and communication systems made them deadly, but also vulnerable. If he blinded them, they were nothing more than heavily armored brutes stumbling in the dark. The tracker fell, clutching at his ruined helmet, while the others scrambled for cover. But the next shot struck home, piercing through a tiny seam in the alien's neck armor. He was dead before he hit the ground. Panic set in. The surviving trackers tried to pinpoint the sniper's location, but the mountains swallowed sound. Echoes bounced off the rocky terrain, making it impossible to tell where the shots were coming from. One by one, they fell. The last tracker, his camouflage flickering erratically from the damage to his suit, tried to run. He abandoned his squad, sprinting for the exfiltration point. A mistake. Reese waited. He didn't fire immediately, he let the alien believe he had escaped. He let the tracker hope. Then, one final shot. And the last of the hunters dropped, the light fading from his alien eyes. The growing fear. By the time the Zirac command received word of what had happened, it was already too late. The fear had begun to spread. No one wanted to be assigned to human hunting duty. Veteran soldiers, who had once mocked humanity's weapons, now refused to patrol the mountain passes. Officers whispered of a demon, an unseen force that could strike from anywhere. Some even believed it wasn't human at all. The legend of the Phantom Sniper spread faster than any official report. The Zirac Dominion had fought countless species, but this was different. They had conquered planets, but they had never fought a war like this, against an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't counter, and worst of all, couldn't understand. Zirac retaliation. Infuriated by the continued losses, High General Vorkul, the ruthless commander leading the Earth invasion, ordered a full-scale crackdown. The Zirac mobilized hundreds of troops. They deployed gunships to sweep the forests, bombarding suspected sniper nests with plasma fire. They sent biological drones, designed to track human scent and movement. Entire villages, innocent civilians, were wiped out in retaliation. But Reese didn't break. He watched from the shadows as the Zirac committed atrocity after atrocity, trying to lure him out. He clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and held steady. He knew the truth: if he revealed himself now, if he let rage control him, he would die. So he waited. Watched. Plotted. And then, when the Zirac finally let their guard down, when they thought they had finally crushed the resistance, he struck. The convoy massacre. Reese's next attack wasn't just about eliminating soldiers, it was about sending a message. A high-ranking Zirac general, a smug warlord named Jather, was moving through the Appalachian region with a heavily armed convoy. Tanks, hovercrafts, and armored troops accompanied him, an unstoppable force, meant to prove the futility of human resistance. Reese turned it into a bloodbath. Using explosives salvaged from fallen Zirac patrols, he set up a trap along the convoy's path. When the first hovercraft passed over the hidden charges, the ground erupted in flames. Panic. Confusion. Screaming orders in an alien tongue. Then, as the survivors scrambled for cover, the real attack began. Reese fired methodically, each shot a kill. A gunner, trying to set up a heavy weapon? Dead. A shield operator, charging his plasma barrier? Shot through the exposed wrist. The general himself, cowering behind his own troops? One bullet. Between the eyes. The massacre was over in minutes. When the smoke cleared, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees, and the faint, lingering echo of the last rifle shot. A galaxy on edge. This was no longer just a human resistance issue. When word reached the Zirac High Council, it sent shockwaves through the Dominion. A single human, one man, was systematically hunting and killing their best warriors. The generals were no longer laughing. Now, they were terrified. The Phantom Sniper wasn't just a nuisance, he was a symbol. If a lone human could do this, if he could break their forces, shatter their morale, and strike fear into the heart of an empire, what else were humans capable of? The hunt was no longer about crushing an insurgency. It was about erasing a legend before it spread further. Because if the Phantom kept winning, if he kept killing, he wouldn't just be a problem for the Zirac. He would be the reason they lost Earth. And the first sign that humanity was far more dangerous than they ever imagined. The Zirac Dominion could not tolerate humiliation. The deaths of officers and elite troops at the hands of a single human sniper had become more than just a tactical problem, it was an insult. A stain on their empire's dominance. Their forces had wiped out entire civilizations, subjugated species with ease, and annihilated planetary defenses that had been light years ahead of Earth's technology. And yet, here they were, losing soldiers to a man with a rifle. General Vorkull, the supreme commander of the Earth invasion, was furious. The war had been a foregone conclusion, and now this Phantom had transformed it into a campaign of attrition and fear. The Zirac were not built for fear. But fear was exactly what Reese had given them. Deploying the killers. The Zirac had tried their trackers, their elite recon squads. They had failed. They had tried brute force, burning villages, bombing forests, turning entire mountain ranges into smoldering craters. They had found nothing. Now, they turned to something worse. The Mind Hunters. These were not ordinary Zirac soldiers. They were something else. The Dominion rarely needed assassins. Their empire won through overwhelming military might, not covert warfare. But when they faced something they couldn't understand, they sent in the Mind Hunters. Part augmented warrior, part psychic predator, a Mind Hunter could track the patterns of thought, sense the presence of prey, anticipate their next move before they even made it. They didn't just hunt their targets. They unraveled them. And so, they were deployed to the Appalachian Mountains. Their orders? Find the Phantom. Kill him. Make sure no one remembers his name. The first encounter. Reese knew something was different before he even saw them. For weeks, he had been the one dictating the fight, choosing when and where to strike. He set traps, he planned ambushes, he controlled the battlefield. Now? He was being followed. Not in the obvious way. He never saw a patrol. Never heard the usual rustling of heavy-footed Zirac moving through the brush. But he could feel it. Like a shadow lurking behind him, just out of sight. A subtle wrongness, an itch in his instincts that wouldn't go away. And then, it happened. He had set up a decoy, a fallen Zirac rifle placed atop a ridge, meant to lure in a curious soldier. He had a perfect sniper perch, lined up to take the shot as soon as the enemy moved into position. But before he could pull the trigger, he hesitated. Something whispered in the back of his mind. Something telling him to look left. He did. And there, not 20 feet away, stood a mindhunter. A predator like no other. It had no armor. No heavy weaponry. Just a flowing dark cloak, and a strange, twisting shimmer around its head. Reese didn't think. He pulled the trigger, point-blank shot to center mass. The bullet struck true. But the mindhunter wasn't there anymore. It had moved, before the bullet even reached it. Reese rolled instinctively, feeling the brush of air as a thin, curved blade sliced through the space where his throat had just been. He scrambled back, leveling his rifle for another shot. The mindhunter just stood there, tilting its head. Then, it spoke. The Zirak language was harsh and guttural, but this was different. The words were inside Reese's head, twisting and slithering, forcing their way into his thoughts. You are alone, Hunter. You are dying, and you do not know it yet. Reese didn't answer. He fired again. The mindhunter shifted, almost lazily, and the bullet veered off course, as if reality itself had bent around it. Then it moved. Fast. Too fast. Reese barely managed to dodge as the alien blinked from one spot to another, closing the distance in a fraction of a second. He rolled downhill, using gravity to push himself away, bringing his rifle up. The mindhunter was already there. A brutal kick sent Reese crashing into a tree, pain exploding in his ribs. His vision swam, but he forced himself up, had to move, had to shoot. But the mindhunter wasn't attacking. It was smiling. You are good, the voice slithered into his skull. But not enough. Then, for the first time since the invasion began, Reese ran. The hunt in reverse. Reese had always been the predator. Always in control. Always the one dictating the battlefield. Not anymore. Now, he was prey. He could feel it, a presence in his mind, tracking his every step, twisting his instincts, clouding his thoughts. Every time he tried to find a hiding place, he felt uneasy, as if something was nudging him away from it. Every time he tried to set a trap, he second-guessed himself. His mind wasn't his own anymore. He had to break free. So he did something insane. Turning the tide. Reese stopped running. Instead, he closed his eyes. And he listened. Not with his ears. Not with his eyes. But with something deeper. If the mindhunter could predict his thoughts, if it could see into his mind, then he had to stop thinking. He had to stop planning. He had to rely on instinct. The next time the whispering voice slithered into his skull, Reese didn't resist it. Instead, he welcomed it. And in that moment, he felt it. Not just the mindhunter's presence, but its focus. Its pattern. The way it anticipated his every move. And then, in a single impossible second, Reese moved against his own instincts, countering its prediction before it could react. He turned. Aimed. Fired. The mindhunter staggered. For the first time, it looked surprised. It wasn't a kill shot, but it was enough. The alien hissed, its twisted shimmer flickering, and then it vanished into the night. Reese fell to his knees, breathing hard. The hunt wasn't over. But now? Now, he had learned something. The mindhunters weren't unstoppable. And if they could bleed, that meant he could kill them. The Zirak had made a mistake. They thought the mindhunters would break him. They thought tracking him meant killing him. But Reese wasn't just some insurgent with a rifle. He was a hunter. And now, he knew how to hunt them back. Shadows in the snow. The Appalachian winter had set in. The forests, once thick with green, were now a bleached labyrinth of ice and bone-white trees. Snow muted every footstep, deadening sound. It should have given the mindhunters an advantage. They didn't need tracks, didn't rely on vision. They moved like ghosts, slipping between spaces, bending perception to control the battlefield. But Reese had learned something crucial in their last fight. They weren't invincible. Their ability to predict his moves? It wasn't mind reading. It was pattern recognition, a highly advanced version of the same tactical intuition that human snipers used. They didn't know his thoughts, they just knew what he was likely to do next. So he stopped being predictable. He changed everything. Baiting the ghosts. Reese spent the next 3 days setting the stage. He stalked the mindhunters instead of avoiding them, watching how they moved, how they tracked him. They moved in pairs, always circling, never directly engaging. That told him one thing. They weren't sure anymore. They were afraid. And fear meant they could be led into a trap. The kill zone. The perfect location came in the form of an abandoned lumber mill, its skeletal remains half buried in snow. The wide-open kill zone was bait. It looked like a place where a desperate human might try to hide or take shelter. Reese didn't hide. He waited. The moment the mindhunters entered the mill, he triggered the distraction, a carefully placed incendiary charge detonated at the far end of the complex, lighting up the sky in a bloom of fire. The Mindhunters reacted instantly. One blinked forward, shifting toward the explosion. The second turned, scanning for movement. That was the opening. Reese was already prone in the snow, lined up and waiting. The first shot took the closest Mindhunter's head clean off. The second teleported an instant before the bullet hit. But Reese wasn't aiming to kill. The real shot had already been fired. A split second before pulling the trigger on the first kill, Reese had placed a second shot slightly ahead of the second hunter's escape path. It teleported right into the bullet. Through the eye socket. The bodies hit the ground. The ghosts were dead. Escalation. Reese exhaled, steadying himself. 2 down. But there were more. And now, the Zirac knew they had underestimated him again. The general takes the field. The next day, something unexpected happened. The Zirac didn't send another hunting party. They didn't drop orbital strikes. Instead, General Vorkal himself arrived. Reese spotted him from the ridgeline, watching through his scope as the armored warlord stepped onto human soil. He was taller than the others, bulkier, his ornate battle plate gleaming under the gray sky. Around him, a full battalion of elite warriors spread out, setting up defensive positions. No overconfidence. No mocking. Vorkal wasn't hunting Reese. He was challenging him. A direct confrontation. One man against an entire battalion. Reese almost laughed. He welcomed the challenge. Breaking the invincible army. Reese moved first. The Zirac had set up a perfect defensive formation, but they weren't used to fighting someone like him. The first thing he did was cripple their vision. He had stolen Zirac plasma grenades from a previous ambush, modifying them with timer triggers. Tossing them into the valley below, he let them detonate simultaneously, unleashing a blinding wave of white-hot light. The Zirac helmets auto-adjusted, but in those 3 seconds of blindness, Reese had already repositioned. First shot, commander of the left flank. Dead. Second shot, demolitions expert reaching for a weapon. Dead. Panic set in. The Zirac, for all their discipline, had never fought an invisible enemy in such close quarters. Reese kept moving, never staying in the same position for more than a shot. Every time a squad thought they had his location pinned, another shot came from a different direction. The duel. Then came Vorkal. The general did not run. He did not hide. He stood in the open, weapon in hand, scanning the ridgeline. Reese aimed. Vorkal turned his head slightly, and in that impossible moment, he dodged the shot. What? Reese adjusted, firing again. The bullet stopped midair. Vorkal had activated a localized gravitic shield, manipulating the bullet's trajectory just enough to render it harmless. Reese narrowed his eyes. The general was adapting. And he wasn't alone. Behind him, the remaining Zirac forces were reorganizing, moving with discipline instead of panic. This was no longer an ambush. This was a war. The final move. Reese took a deep breath. He had 1 shot left. Not in his rifle, he had plenty of ammo. 1 shot to end this fight before it became unwinnable. So he stopped aiming for Vorkal himself. He aimed for the one thing that no amount of alien technology could replace. The mountain above them. A precise shot into the ice shelf, triggering an avalanche. Vorkal's eyes widened as thousands of tons of snow, ice, and rock collapsed down onto his battalion. The last thing Reese saw was the general vanishing beneath the storm. Aftermath. Silence. Then. A slow grinding noise as the snow settled. Reese watched, breathing hard, rifle at the ready. Then, movement. A single armored figure rising from the snow. Vorkal had survived. But his army? Gone. Reese and the general locked eyes across the battlefield. Neither moved. Then, slowly, Vorkal turned and left. He had come to kill the Phantom. Instead, he had witnessed something worse. A lone human had wiped out an entire battalion. And now, the Zirac had to ask themselves one terrifying question. If one man could do this, what would happen if the rest of humanity joined the fight? The Zirac Dominion prided itself on absolute dominance. No species had ever made them reconsider a war. No resistance had ever been too costly to crush. Until now. Until one man with a rifle brought them to the brink of something they never imagined, doubt. The reckoning. Reese didn't celebrate his victory. He watched. He stayed in the mountains, scanning the wreckage of the Zirac battalion, watching for any signs of survivors. Most were buried, frozen beneath the crushing weight of the avalanche. But Vorkal had walked away. That meant this wasn't over. The Zirac counterattack. They came at dawn. Not in hunting squads. Not in small patrols. They came in force. A full shock brigade, hundreds of soldiers, supported by low-hovering warships, their railguns trained on the mountainside. They weren't here to hunt him. They were here to erase him. Reese watched from the ridgeline, his breath slow and steady despite the overwhelming force below. He had expected this. He had prepared for it. The first plasma bombardment reduced the valley to molten glass, vaporizing every tree and rock in sight. The Zirac weren't taking chances, they were burning the entire battlefield, ensuring no sniper could hide. But Reese wasn't in the valley. He was already inside their perimeter. Becoming the nightmare. The moment the bombardment began, Reese moved like a ghost. He was already behind enemy lines, slipping through the confusion, using their own paranoia against them. The Zirac were looking for a sniper at a distance. They weren't expecting a phantom in their ranks. Reese struck fast. Brutally. The first kill was silent, a combat knife to the throat of a squad commander, yanking him back into the snow. The second was a distraction, a stolen plasma grenade, tossed into an ammo cache. The explosion tore through the flank, sending alien bodies sprawling. By the time the Zirac realized what was happening, Reese had already moved. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't a man with a rifle. He was the Phantom. The fall of Vorkal. In the chaos, Vorkal emerged. The Zirac general strode through the fire and wreckage, his gravitic shield flickering, his power sword humming in the cold air. Reese lined up his shot. But something felt wrong. Vorkal wasn't alone. A second Mindhunter stepped from the shadows. Reese's heart pounded. He had killed two before, but this one felt different. Stronger. Smarter. The last surviving Mindhunter. And it had learned it. "We see you now, Phantom." The voice slithered into Reese's skull, and suddenly, his vision blurred. His thoughts scattered. The Mindhunter wasn't just tracking him this time. It was inside him. He tried to move, but his body locked up. Vorkal raised his sword, stepping closer. The general had won. The Phantom was finally caught. One last trick. But Reese had one thing the Zirac still didn't understand. Humanity doesn't surrender. With the last of his willpower, he let go of his rifle, and dropped backward off the cliff. Vorkal lunged, slashing the air where Reese had stood. The Mindhunter twisted, realizing too late. Because Reese hadn't just jumped. He had rigged the ledge with explosives. The entire ridge detonated, taking the Mindhunter with it. Reese plummeted into the abyss below, swallowed by the blizzard. The legend spreads. Days later, the Zirac forces searched the wreckage. No body was found. Vorkal stood in the shattered valley, staring into the endless white expanse of the mountains. Reese should have been dead. But the general couldn't prove it. And that was the problem. Because in the Zirac ranks, whispers were already spreading. The Phantom couldn't be killed. He could be shot, burned, buried, but he would always return. Vorkal clenched his fists. The war wasn't over. But something had changed. The Zirac feared Earth now. And fear was the beginning of defeat.